Hello, I'm Simon. Today, I want to talk about what we at Excession Events are all about. What we're ultimately all about is helping organizations compete more effectively. And to do that, we want to get away from a world where we just talk to clients about products and assume that the best product wins. So let's talk about how organizations actually go to market today and see why it's such a problem. Most organizations today play what I would define as half-court tennis. They only ever think about what they're going to do, what their new product is, not what the competitors are going to do, what the competitors could do that might disrupt their game. So effectively, they're playing tennis without looking at what the other side of the net is doing. I think that's a major problem. Another part of today's landscape is that organizations put together charts like the one on your screen now. Totally meaningless. Everyone takes the same data, looks at it, finds the highest numbers for their product, and proves that their product is best. Funnily enough, every manufacturer does it, and by surprise, they all discover that their product is the best. Another way of looking at data today that is ultimately meaningless is to look at things like graphs. So you look at a graph from one of the analyst firms to show the numbers have gone up or down, and you retrofit a story that actually fits that data. Now, it might be true, but it also probably isn't. Or another way of looking at data is to go to one of the big analyst firms. I'll not put any names in here, but I think you can guess who I'm talking about. And you have your special magic, should we call it a quadrant? And if you're in the top right-hand corner, you publish it and show the world you're the in the top right-hand corner, you more money said. Analysts put you in the top right-hand corner. Maybe it's used as a marketing activity, certainly not a competitive intelligence one. So I've been thinking about this for a very long time because I'm very old. And I've realized that actually there's a whole bunch of ways that organizations can compete, which have got nothing to do or very little to do with the actual product. So I want to give you an overview here, and in follow-up videos, I'm going to go into a lot more detail with each one of these, and I'll give you examples. And a couple of things to consider before I get into this list. The first is this applies to any organization. This could be the biggest company in the world, or it could be a lemonade stand on the corner of the street that you live on. Also, it's not just about your competitor. It could be about someone you're looking to do an alliance with, or some M&A with, or if you're a PE company, someone you're looking to invest in and maybe pat together with another organization. Any organization you're looking at through this system could be very useful to you. So think of it as more than just competitors, because I think there is more to it than just competitors. Having said that, let's get into the first one. So number one, finance. So the financial position of an organization defines capabilities. That may seem pretty obvious. So as an example, a company I know of has got over $1 billion in the bank. So you think, oh, they must have lots of opportunity for M&A. But they've also publicly stated that they'll be buying their own shares back for the next few years. Now, I have no opinion as to whether that's a good, bad, or indifferent decision, but it does let others know what they're going to be capable of doing. If you're buying your own shares back, chances are you're going to be pretty conservative. You're not going to be doing much in the way of M&A. If, however, a company isn't buying its own share backs and has lots of money, then there's a really interesting opportunity for M&A. What does that mean for you? I don't know yet, because we don't know who the players are. But there's certainly an opportunity to understand what your competitors could do, dependent on their relative financial position. Part number two is the organizational structure. So the finance may define what they could do. Organizational structure defines more likely defines what they actually will do. So think of it this way. Think of your favorite sport and think of a coach or a manager from one team who moves to another team. What do? Chances are they've been hired to do whatever it is they did at the last company or the last sports team. So this is also true in business. If you have a CEO who's really good at M&A and they leave one company and join another one, I think it's fair to say that they're probably going to lean into M&A. If a global head of sales had a particular company that they like competing against, then they'll try it at their new company. It's a pretty reasonable bet. And you can get a really good understanding of what the shape and the culture ultimately of a company is by who is actually running the company. Not just the CEO, but the CFO, head of sales, head of marketing, head of engineering. These people can really give you an idea as to what direction the business is looking to go in. By the way, it doesn't seem to matter whether these successful doing or not. The jobs, once they get them, it's a report what they did at the time. Number 3, what's their business model? So in the world that I come from, many organizations sell to IT managers, but they do that through resellers, and then they do that through distribution companies. But if your competitor works the same way you do, well, that's kind of interesting to know and useful. And we'll talk about how that might be a really powerful way of either leaning into competing by leveraging some of the power you may have or relationships you have over distribution and resellers. And if you're a smaller player and there's a bigger player out there, you might want to look at how you would hedge against somebody else doing the same thing to you. Another way of considering this is if, for example, your organization works with distribution and resellers and sells to IT managers, but your top competitor sells through online to line managers and avoids IT departments, well, that's really interesting if they're particularly successful at it. But it's also an issue if you're looking to do some M&A and you buy up a business whose business model is utterly different to yours. How are you going to integrate those two businesses together? So something for lots of folks to think about there. Number 4, product portfolio. Now, I said earlier that the product is less important than perhaps many people think, and I would still state that. After all, product portfolio is only one of my 12 vectors that we're looking at here today. But I think it's important to note that product portfolio is more important than individual products. Customers do not buy individual products, or rarely do. They normally buy a collection of products. So you don't necessarily need to have the best, whatever that is defined by. You need to have the best overall solution, not necessarily the best each individual product. Downstream model. So what does that mean? Well, as we've already talked about a little bit about business models, what's their downstream business model look like? And ultimately, what's it look like relative to yours? Are you a billion-dollar player in a market and sell through a certain distribution partner, and your competitor is only doing 50 million a year with a distribution partner? Could you lean on that distribution partner? Sure. If you're a reseller, could the manufacturers come and lean on you, either in a positive or negative way? Sure, they could. Another angle to consider here with downstream is what could you do to disrupt somebody else's model? If you're running a lemonade stand, that would look rather different than it would be if you're running a major bank. But many of the same points are the same. And if you don't do the analysis, you'll never know the answers. Upstream model. So what does this mean? Well, for a manufacturer, like a vendor, that would include where do you buy your components, where they build products, things like Paris, for example, matter in the manufacturing electronics, where people build products, a lot of difference. If you're a reseller or distribution, your upstream model may not be at a component level, but it may be at a who are you buying products through, who are you doing partnerships with. Understanding these, both as a hedge and or as a choke point against your competitors, is pretty important. Most people don't even consider it. ESG. Now, ESG is one of those topics that certainly in the industry I've come out of, many people in sales will say, oh, my clients don't care very much about ESG. But I would actually argue that's not really true. The people you're talking to may not care very much about ESG, but individuals within the organization will. So one of the things that a lot of folks talk about is things like recycled plastics and how good you are for the environment. And on a personal basis, I think those are very important. But actually from a leverage point of view, things like corporate governance are very much more important. So if you're a large organization and you've got 10 years worth or more of audited finances, you'll have no problem with the purchasing department within a large mega corporation. However, if you're a small company, you're a small scrappy startup business, you probably want to avoid talking to the purchasing department as much as possible, stay under the radar and go and work with the specifiers who are more interested in innovation and a fast moving dynamic company than they are in one that has lots and lots of financial backing. So where you are on that scale and where your competitor is on that scale will make a huge difference as to who you want to go and talk to within your competitive environment. Alliances and partnerships. So in the PC industry, no vendor really has any option but to work very well with Microsoft. Very obviously, if your product can't support Windows 11, then you're kind of dead in the water as a PC vendor. That's just an example. There are plenty of other examples within industry. If you don't have a good relationship with the people who make your product work, as it were, then you're going to be in real trouble. So what can you do to leverage your position relative to your competitor? Could you get some sort of accreditation that they don't have? Could they do the same to you? What would you do about it? How would you hedge or use that as a choke opportunity? There's a lot to be done in alliances. Until you get specific, it's kind of hard to talk about particular examples. But I'm sure most of us have got ideas in our heads as to which kind of alliances and partnerships are worth having and the ones that probably aren't. Next, the triangle of compromise, the good, fast, cheap triangle. I'm sure many of us are familiar with this. So one of the first things I'd recommend any company do is put themselves and the competitor they're looking at on the good, fast, cheap triangle of compromise, and then come up with an idea as to which direction are they going in. Are they going for higher innovation, better quality, whatever that means? Are they going for a lower price? Are they going for a faster innovation? Which of those two of the three, remember, you can actually have? Which of those two are your competitor going for? Which of those two are you going for? And which direction are you heading? It's all well and good if you want to get a lot of innovation. The market is commoditized. Competitors doing that, then you could be in great shape. So keeping an eye on these things, desperately important. So the pitch. So this is what they actually say to clients. I think this is a very, very interesting angle. So what a CEO of a vendor or a big reseller might think their salespeople say to clients, what their salespeople actually say to clients, and what your partners may say to clients are probably entirely different things. And most companies don't even go off and find out. So one of the things that every reseller will have in the world is an A brand, a B brand, and a C brand. And if you're a vendor and you do not know where you stand on that list, you're going to be in trouble. By the way, here's a tip. If you don't know where you stand, you're probably the C brand. So what do I mean by A, B, and C brand? Well, most people selling products, if they have a range of products to sell, will have the product that they lead with, right? That's their preferred vendor or their A brand. Then there'll be the B brand, and the B brand will be the product that they'll sell if they can't sell for whatever reason the A brand. You know, it's not available. The client's already got a supplier for the A brand. The client may have a pathological hatred of the A brand. Whatever it is, they'll always have a backup. Often, it's a lower capability, lower cost solution. For those very price sensitive customers, most people will have a premium product as their A brand, a value product for their B brand, and the C brand becomes it's on the shelf. If you'd like to buy it, I can supply it. Now, some companies specialize in being the C brand of the market, and there's nothing wrong with that. There are some big players in the IT industry who simply let everyone else go off and do all the specification, and then when the client's looking for the best possible price, they'll be the guy who supplies the C brand. I think we all know what sort of organizations those are, and they exist, and there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't, and ultimately, it doesn't matter if you have a good, bad, or indifferent opinion of them. They are in the market. So if you're a vendor and you don't know if you're the A or the B or the C brand for your For your partners, and you're probably the C brand. And one of the first things you need to do is go off and find out where you stand and go off and find out what people are saying about you. Not just your own people, but your partners as well, because they're very unlikely to be just reading off your website. So what are they saying? Next, number 10, existential threats. So what's the existential threat to the market? Well, I think that's a very interesting question. 10 years ago in video conferencing, for example, everyone was running SIP or H323 based video conferencing endpoints. And the existential threat was the likes of, well, Zoom really at that time, maybe Blue Jeans, and then like who their own effective wall solution. Perhaps another example outside conferencing would be car rent, right? Who is the biggest competitor to Hertz, for example? I guess most people would probably say Avis or Sixt or, somebody else like that. I would contend that the biggest existential threat to Hertz is probably not a car rental place. It's probably Uber. Because most people these days get off at the airport, don't bother going to the car rental place. They simply get in an Uber and go wherever they need to go because it's become so easy. So if you're competing with Hertz, for example, you may end up falling off the same cliff that the car rental business does because you both missed the existential threat. I've written a lot about existential threats and Excession events in the past, so I won't labour this point, but it's a pretty important one that you don't want to be competing with someone else while you both go extinct. And then number 11, what's the 5-year plan? Because ultimately, there's no point in competing with someone who is going in an entirely different direction to you. So in the AV space, there are a few companies who make hardware and software today who have stated that they will get out of the hardware business completely and they are going to be running software only. Well, if you're in the hardware business, maybe you're not going to end up competing with these people in a few years. So perhaps you want to consider that your top competitor will be somebody else, because what's the point in going to all the effort if you end up all going in different directions? So once you have this view, once you have done some analysis, and by the way, Competitive Intelligence Playbook gives you not only some ideas around this, but also the questions you should be asking yourselves, you also need to ask the same questions of yourself. Because no comparison ever makes sense on its own. It only ever makes sense within a larger capability. So 2 lemonade stands make sense to compete with each other. 2 mid-sized companies, 2 global companies. But there's no point in any one company looking at itself and going, oh, I've got $1 billion in the bank, or I've got $8 in the bank. It's only meaningful relative to what your competitor's up to. So this exercise is not only interesting to see what your competitor's doing, but it also gives you a real mirror to show to yourself as well. So who is this work for? Well, I kind of indicated this at the beginning. Private equity should be using this sort of tool to go beyond looking at a product range and a finance spreadsheet and looking at how do you do business, because that way you can produce a far better result for your users. So private equity should look at this sort of tool because if they're patting together multiple companies, they want to understand, or should want to understand, how they all operate, because they probably don't all operate the same way. It also helps them work out a proper valuation. If I'm doing M&A, if I'm a company that works through distribution and resellers and I sell to IT managers, as an example, and I'm looking to do M&A with a company that sells direct to line managers, M&A need to be considered because it wouldn't work, but because you do need to consider what your go-to-market strategy would look like. If I'm doing alliances, if I'm trying to do some more work with another organization, I want to understand how their business operates, because if their business operates in an entirely different way than mine, then it's going to be an issue. I'm not saying it's unsurmountable, but you want to go into that with your eyes open. And then, of course, if you're doing partnerships, if you're signing up a new vendor, for example, if you're a reseller or a distribution partner, what does that new vendor bring to the party that the existing ones don't? Because bringing on a new partnership does cost money and time and opportunity cost. So there has to be more in it than simply a better product. So at the end of the day, going through this process should make you understand the market better, should help you understand your competitor better, and most importantly, it will help you understand your own business better. And I think that's a problem worth solving.